Let me share my screen so we can take a look and see what doing a migration with OneData would actually look like. So one of the first problems that we are confronted with when doing migration projects with our customers is that almost nobody knows what is in the BW system. What objects are there? How are they implemented? How do they relate to each other? Because these BW systems, they have been growing over decades, sometimes 20 or 30 years. And people, they come and go, and projects come and go, while documentation is often outdated or incomplete. And this is a real problem because you cannot modernize something that you cannot see. And at OneData, we address this with our interactive map of the BW system. So what we do is we get the metadata and only the metadata from the BW system. We structure it and we augment it, and then we build this interactive BW map from it that you can see here. And you see different islands in this map, and each island groups BW objects of the same type together. So you have an island for all the data source objects, you have an island for all the BW queries, an island for composite providers, and so on and so forth. And this transparency, see it as the foundation for your migration project that gives you the transparency that you need to make the decisions that are yet to be made. But we can also go beyond this pure structuring of what is there in the BW and look at impact of the object. So let's apply some coloring to the BW objects, and we very easily see those with high impact. So a lot of downstream consumption. These are the darker ones. And just as easy as you can with this coloring identify the very important objects, you could also very easily identify the objects that are not important anymore. For example, BW queries that have not been accessed even once throughout a fiscal year. And typically in this phase of the migration, the teams that we work together with at our customers, they will find that a significant percentage of their BW footprint can confidently be left behind. Because in the end, the migration should not be about moving everything. It should be about moving the things that matter, the right things that business still needs to the new system. For example, the SAP BW Datasphere. Now, let's assume I'm a data engineer and I, together with business, found out that a certain composite provider with this name I just entered is important, and that the reporting pipeline that is hooked to it needs to be migrated because the business stakeholders, they need these numbers, these figures to derive their decisions. So we would find this composite provider here, maybe some very similar objects, and we see that there are some queries apparently tied to it. Now, if I want to migrate this composite provider, I first want to understand how it has been implemented in the BW system. And digging into this one object that I want to migrate, I would not do it and continue in this map that gave me transparency on the full BW, but I would jump to the use case tool. It's a dedicated tool that OneData offers to do a migration. So let's create a new migration use case. And the composite provider I just looked for in the map, it's about reporting on production orders. All right, so new migration use case to migrate the reporting of the production orders. Now, in this use case tool, we have a guide that goes through this migration with us. And it first asks us to provide some basic information on the migration we want to do. So, of course, you're coming from a BW system. That's where the stuff is right now. And we want to migrate to not Snowflake, not Fabric, but in our demo case, to SAP Datasphere. So we want to stick to the SAP environment. And we want to have a good connection in between. So later in the process, you will see that we have some migration agents in place. And while technically it would be possible that these agents interact autonomously directly with SAP Datasphere, our customers still prefer to have a human in the loop. So instead of working directly in Datasphere, the agents will push code to the Git repository, and from there, the employees, the migration engineers, can pull it into Datasphere and run and deploy it there. Okay, so everything is set. We let OneData know that we want to move from BW to Datasphere via Git. So let's move on to the next step. Now we need to look for our composite provider. And for that, we use the asset library. The asset library is based on the same metadata that also feeds the map that we saw. We can now filter for the object type. So now we want to find a composite provider. And I happen to remember the name of this composite provider. So here it is. And I can pull it into my canvas. Great, but what now? If I want to move this or rebuild this composite provider object in my Datasphere, I need to understand what is it made up of? How is it implemented now in the BW? And for this, OneData again takes all the metadata it got from the BW and can, within seconds, show us the upstream dependencies. So what it does now is it shows me what other BW objects this composite provider is created from. So we see upstream in the lineage, there is an ADSO, an info source, another ADSO, and on the very left side, a data source that integrates the ERP data from the HANA database. And this could take days or even weeks to dig this up in complex cases. So it's a big time saving to have this at a click of the button. I could even dig deeper now. So let's assume I want to understand more about this ADSO. I could even look at the ABAP code via the edge here. So this transformation edge tells me that this data source with ABAP code is transformed into this ADSO. And if I want to take a look at this code, I can use a link to go directly there. So wow, what do we see here? We have a table with all the ABAP rules. And what I am particularly interested in this case, is the end routine. So within this repository, coming from the rules, I can jump to the ABAP code, the transformations, and here I see that we have this end routine. And in this end routine, I can see the O from the data source object. And in this case, it's a simple example we selected for the demo. So in the ADSO, there's this field, and whenever this field is not 0, the other one is multiplied by -1. Okay, so I can also take a glimpse at the ABAP code to understand the lineage even further. But I might also be interested in what comes after the composite provider. And I can also show this in the canvas. So here we have 9 BW queries that are provided with data from the composite provider. And with this, I have the complete picture of the production orders reporting pipeline as it is built today in the BW. And since what we see here is not of super high complexity, I, as an engineer, might not feel the need to clean up a lot or optimize a lot and decide today, I want to migrate this reporting pipeline very closely or as closely as possible to how it is implemented in the BW. So I want to preserve the investment that people did in the BW and do a like-for-like migration. However, as we will see, so not all BW logic can simply be shifted to Datasphere. You will not find the same objects there. You will not find the ABAP code or matching technology for the ABAP code. So you have to translate to SQL, for example. But that we will also see in the next step. So now what we decided is I want to do a like-for-like migration, stick as close as possible to the implementation in the BW. And now I switch to the target structure. And OneData creates a migration plan for me. So what we saw so far is the source lineage, how this reporting is implemented in the BW. What we now see is the target plan. So how I want it to look like in the SAP Datasphere. And since we are doing like for like and want to keep the objects very close to what they look like in the BW, of course, the plan is also basically a copy of what we had in the BW with all the query objects and the objects upstream of the composite provider as well. So let's zoom into there, because what does this mean again? To get this composite provider up and running in the Datasphere, I have to create also all the other objects upstream in the Datasphere. So let's zoom into the very left end of the lineage. And that's quite interesting. Here we see this ycost AFGU object. It was the data source object from the BW. Now, OneData tells me there is already something in the SAP Datasphere and that this migration object is already in status review, and it tells me that the quality seems to be quite good. So there was a quality check that passed and so on. And this tells me that somebody already migrated this very left part of my reporting structure. So what I do next is I go directly to the Datasphere to check out this object and understand how far we are. So now we are in the SAP Datasphere and we can take a glimpse into this table. And again, OneData only works with metadata. So we do not retrieve any actual data from your systems. We always integrate with the systems that store the tables and integrate it by a very convenient link so the users can easily jump there and take a preview on the data, but we never pull actual data into OneData. So OneData is purely metadata based. Okay, so this table is filled with some mock data for this demo, and we can see the columns and the content. And we found out, okay, great. So what I need on the very left side of my lineage is already there in Datasphere. And this is quite cool because if I didn't have this transparency, I might have built it a second time and might have done double the work. So since this is already there, we can now move on to the second object in the lineage, this 103, and it was an ADSO. And now I want to migrate this one, and I see here with the status label that development has already started, but apparently the object does not exist yet in the Datasphere. So let's hide the wizard for now and check out this object. Since it's already in development, I expect to see some migration runs already. So let's check out the logs. And here I see, actually there were several runs of the migration agent. So what does this agent even do? The problem I now have as a user. So I understood what I need to shift to Datasphere to build this composite provider to deliver data for the reporting that is needed. That means I would now have to manually go to Datasphere, set up the transformation flows, translate the BW logic to SQL, and so on and so forth. Now with the migration wizard, large parts of this are automated. So this agent, it takes all the context it gets from the BW metadata, but we can also feed it additional things. So some customers give us conference documentation that we feed it. And it takes all this context and uses it to automatically generate code that rebuilds an object that it knows from BW in the new system in the SAP Datasphere. And this is what we see here. So with every of these runs, people were generating such code. And we have that many runs because of the demo case. And I can now, of course, go through it. And I see then here that Matthias did a run at some point. And I can also see which repository the code has been pushed to by the agent. Okay, so the code is actually generated. Now, of course, we want to check out the code as well. So we saw the repository in the branch, and we see here in the folder transformation flows what translation actually has been created. And we want to see the translation of this former ADSO with this 103. So let's go in there, and we would see the SQL query, because in Datasphere it would run on SQL. And quite interestingly, we can also see that it translated this logic that we saw in ABAP before, with this if not 0, then multiply by -1. So if you remember, this is what it looked in ABAP. This is the same logic. But ABAP is not applicable to Datasphere, so the agent translated this very simple example to SQL logic, and thus saved us a lot of manual work. And then this code can be pulled to Datasphere, and for that we need the so-called CSN files, and they are quite similar to this with some additional information. So it would look like this. Yeah, but for readability, we still offer the YAML files here. And then the user also does not manually have to copy this code and create the artifacts in Datasphere and copy the code into there. But we built an integration between Git and Datasphere. So at the click of a button, the user can set up everything in Datasphere, and then it would look like this. So after you deployed the Git code, or not deployed, after you pulled in the Git code to Datasphere, it would appear in the data builder. So here we should find the transformation flow. And so here, transformation flow, and this is the object it creates. So after you pulled in the code, this is what you will find in Datasphere. The transformation flow as we know it. Let's give it a second. And the table that it creates or writes. And now we can go to the specification of this transformation, and you see it's the same SQL code with the translated logic that we also find now in Datasphere. And now the user can deploy and run this code to create the asset. So we saw the agent automatically translate the BW object to a Datasphere object based on what it knows from the BW context. And then the user pulls in the code from Git and can run it here in Datasphere to actually compute things and create the table. All right, so now we went this way from here to there in Datasphere. And not only to the BW, OneData has a metadata connection, but we also have a metadata connection to the Datasphere system. So on a regular basis, OneData would check if there are new objects in Datasphere, and then it would understand, aha, this migration object, I can now find it in my Datasphere. Let's connect it here, and you would get the same feedback as we see for this very first object. Also including the quality stuff, for example. So is the schema correct? So do you have all the column names and the right column types in there, and so on and so forth. And like this, you can then go on in this like-for-like example through your data pipeline until you can provide the final reports, the numbers that business stakeholders need to derive their decisions from the reports. Okay. So what did we see in the demo today? At first, we started in this interactive BW map. This map provides you the foundation for informed migration decisions in the project that you are starting. Then after the map, we saw this migration tool that instantly uncovers upstream and downstream dependencies of the BW objects you want to migrate, which eliminates weeks of manual analysis. Then the migration agent, we saw that it leverages the BW context to automatically translate the objects to SAP Datasphere artifacts. And finally, we saw that OneData continuously validates what already exists in Datasphere to prevent duplicate work and to check the object quality, the freshness and the schema alignment. So, from understanding your BW landscape to validating your Datasphere target state, OneData turns your migration into a guided AI-powered process instead of a manual project that it used to be before.